All right, we're gonna get going now with our webinar. Thank you everyone who has decided to attend live today. I appreciate you guys coming. Today our webinar is called The Psychology of Learning, Catalyst for Enhancing Student Motivation and Engagement. So I am your host today. My name is Johnny, and I'm going to get through some housekeeping details before we start officially with the presentation. So first, let me welcome you guys. So this is an interactive question and answer session. So what I mean is you can ask questions and we're going to have some nice conversation with the presenters. So if you have any questions, I want to just mention, you might be wondering, how do I submit them? So in the Zoom toolbar on your screen, it might be at the bottom of your screen, it might be at the top of your screen. If you hover over it, you'll see a nice question mark that says Q&A, or it might be under the More menu with a Q&A window. This is where you put your questions. These will come to myself and other panelists helping me with the webinar will mark them for being read live or will respond to you directly in the Q&A window. But that's where you put your questions. And as you see that note at the bottom of the screen there, if we don't have time to get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar. But that's definitely where you put them for today's webinar. Um, Let's see here. A few other things to mention is who our presenters are today. So, our VIPs for the webinar are Dr. Cal Garbin and Dr. Manda Williamson. So, let me tell you a little bit about Cal first. So, Dr. Cal Garbin, he joined the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 1985 after receiving a degree in experimental psychology from the University of Texas at Arlington. So, Dr. Garbin's initial investigations of multimodal perception and cross-modal memory for object attributes such as shape and texture eventually gave way to an overwhelming desire to understand how web-based technology can be used to increase the speed, depth, and application of student learning. His courses include a cradle to grave series of research methods and data analysis classes. Much of his research is collaborative, which, along with his consulting work, allows him to apply and continually broaden his methodological and statistical skills and have some great stories for classes. Dr. Garbin has earned over 30 teaching awards, including the highest honor bestowed upon instructors in the University of Nebraska-Lincoln system. Now, for Dr. Manda Williamson, she joined University of Nebraska-Lincoln faculty in 2005 after receiving a degree in psychology from Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Williamson has been an instructor for multiple PSYC classes, including Psych 181. She recently took over Dr. Garbin's undergraduate courses in research design and data analysis after his mentorship. And now, during his retirement, Dr. Williamson's current research focuses on factors that improve student success in gateway courses, as well as mentoring undergraduate students through the publication process and pedagogy-focused research. Dr. Williamson has received multiple Outstanding Educator of the Year awards from the UNL Psychology Department, the Association of Parents at UNL, and UNL Student Association. So we're really happy to have Dr. Garb and Dr. Wilson with us today. They'll be doing a bulk of the presentation today, but two other people to mention. That's Christina Perdiculias. Christina is our president and COO here at Digital Ed. And myself, I'm Johnny. I work in product marketing at Digital Ed, so I'll be more so your host for today. So, with that in mind, I think you've heard enough about me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass things over to Christina and Manda here on my side.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Johnny, for the introduction. We as a team have been looking forward to this webinar for some time because of the extraordinary impact that our discussions have had with Dr. Garbin and Dr. Williamson. They've really have impacted us as a team. So we've left those conversations so inspired, but at the same time, incredibly humbled by the dedication that these two educators have had in crafting the students' learning journey using principles of how learning actually takes place and what you can tap into in order to support that process. And that's applicable no matter what discipline or subject you are focused on, which is why we're so excited to have you here today. So while the digital ed team has had the benefit of these multiple conversations now, Amanda and Cal, I'll call you by your first names given our conversations here, but hopefully that everyone else does the same. This is an open conversation for everyone to learn from here. But I'd like to bring our audience up to speed on your approach and what principles you lean into in order to create such wonderful results and really truly prepare your students for that next phase of their education. So if you can kindly provide us just a high level insight just to get us started and get the ball rolling for everyone to understand where you're coming from.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Christina. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly, and it's basically to just lay down some terminology and the context for today. But first of all, I just want to thank all of you so much for attending this live session. I appreciate the time that you took out of your day, and I hope that we do our best to not waste any of that time. So having said that, with the conversations that we've had repeatedly, what seemed to resonate an awful lot was the way that Cal has used Mobius in particular to assist student learning, not only in learning the language of our discipline, but the skill set that's required to execute it properly with respect to data analysis and with creating particular research designs. And his focus is on what's called single event proficiency. So really quickly, to give you a little bit of background, I want you to first think about the course that you were thinking of that brought you into this webinar today. So you probably teach more than one course, but for right now, just to create a context, think of a particular course. And then I want you to think about a topic that you teach in that course that involves not only students mastering your discipline-specific language, but then also having to use that language to execute a particular skill that shows mastery within that discipline. So for example, just to take it to like grade 5 algebra, we have to get our students to understand the difference between a mathematical expression and a mathematical equation. So that would be a what kind of learning. When we ask questions that begin with the word what, we're asking about what we call declarative memory. And you answer that question with declaring the answer consciously. But then if we take it another step further, still looking at mathematical expressions, we then ask them, okay, using that language, how do you simplify a mathematical expression? And so I have an expression on the screen, and the question is, where do you start? And so it's important that the students know the language of the mathematical discipline, but also execute a particular verbal script to demonstrate they understand. In the US, we learned either the acronym PEMDAS, or we learned Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally, which was a script for us to employ whenever we were faced with simplifying an expression. So in this particular case, we have a language, but then we have a verbal script that has to be executed in order to show script or skill learning. So I'll give you about 30 seconds just for you to pick a particular topic, not even a whole lesson, but just one topic that you want your students to come away with that involves language and also script learning.
One thing that's a great example, why PEMDAS is a great example, is that most scripts aren't just about what you're doing, because that's captured in the what part of learning, but it's the order in which they're done. Doing things in the right order is often absolutely necessary for complete success. Partial success you can get by banging at it till you get something done. But very often the notion of script, like I say, carries with it doing things in the right order. And sometimes that order has to be learned.
So hopefully everybody's good. I'm sorry, I can't see what you all are doing, but I hope you have a particular topic that you're going to keep in mind as we make our way through what exactly we do in Mobius to promote mastery of language and then also a particular skill. So what I have on the screen now is a very, very common image that we see in the psychology of learning, and this is called the learning curve. We also revisit this when we're analyzing data, when we want to figure out, as people engage with a particular topic over time, what happens to their competency level? And for the most part, a learning curve is a curve. So initially, when our students are trying out something new in our class, if they go through this process of single event proficiency, they're faced with a number of questions related to one particular topic. And in order to demonstrate proficiency, they have to answer a question related to that topic a required number of times correct. So that's what single event proficiency is. It's demonstrating mastery over a topic with a required number of correct attempts. So along the x-axis, it's time, but we'll just say attempts at a particular topic. And initially when students start, especially if it's a new topic for them, it's a little frustrating. And so that's something that we want to keep in mind, is that when our students are learning, we have to get them comfortable with being frustrated. That's a cool part about learning. Try that with this generation, right? So in the beginning, they try a question, their competency is low, they get it wrong. They get it wrong, they get it wrong, they get it wrong. And then something happens, and that something is critically important to understanding how our students learn, when then all of a sudden there's just this explosion in competency that eventually levels off because they're getting 100% of them correct. And what we think is key to initiating and preserving this learning curve is the student's own metacognitive regulation. And this is something that you might have noticed perhaps is suffering during COVID because of the different ways that we had to educate our students. They're not so locked into talking to themselves. When they get a question wrong, sometimes they don't want to ask, what did I do wrong? Or how did I get this wrong? And so we have to talk our students through the process of, when you get a question wrong, copy down what it is that you did wrong. Try to figure out how to solve that question. Talk to yourself. And then eventually they go, oh, I thought this was, but in reality it was that. And then bam, they just start getting them correct over and over and over. And then they rip through the assignment, demonstrating for one particular topic, single event proficiency. In one sitting, they have become proficient in a particular topic. Cal, what else?
One thing I want to mention is the use of the word topic. In Mobius, an exercise can have multiple topics, and we tend to use those topics to break some thing that we want them to be able to do down into its different kinds. For example, if we back up to the PEMDAS, PEMDAS stays PEMDAS every time. However, some orders in the expression are more difficult than others. We would want to make sure that we give people an opportunity to learn each of the different kinds of things by making each thing its own topic. For example, you want to put the parentheses together. That's really easy here because the parentheses is on the left. You might also want to have a topic where the parentheses is on the right, where they're tempted to start on the left-hand side, but the script tells us to go over to the right. By using multiple topics, we can address the different kinds of things that we want them to learn and make sure that they learn each of them. And we've got another example we'll show you in a couple slides.
All right. Now, one part of the definition is a required number of correct attempts. And that's one of the first big pedagogy questions that you have to decide upon within a given topic. What is the correct number of attempts? And so the key in doing single event proficiency is that by the end of the lesson, everybody leaves with a victory. And so what we mean by that is they can get items wrong. And what happens is Mobius will store that particular topic question that they got wrong, and they will see a different iteration of it. And when they get it right, then they get credit for getting that part of it right. So no matter how many questions you get wrong, there are no stakes here. As long as you persist, you will leave with 100%. And so one of the things that Cal makes quite clear is that when we come up with assignment questions, especially multiple choice or objective kinds of questions, critical when we're giving summative exams is the fairness of each question. If I'm going to ask students 2 questions on one particular topic, I better be darn sure that the question is asked fairly and properly so that students aren't disadvantaged. In single event mastery, fair is completely irrelevant. If I ask a question weirdly and they get it wrong, they're going to remember, oh, that wording was this way and this is what it's supposed to mean. And then they're going to see it again. So they learn not only how to answer the good questions, they learn how to answer the real world mucky questions, especially with respect to research design. When you're reading research, sometimes people don't state hypotheses all that clearly. And so by putting those difficulties and that muddy stuff into single event proficiency questions, the students get exposed to varying degrees of good questions and bad questions. And one of the things that I thought was pretty funny is that one of Cal's students said, hey, when we do these pink things, we call them pink things. We'll explain that in just a second. But when we do these single event proficiency questions, nobody gets out of here stupid. I think that's a pretty cool thing that when the students are recognizing it. And so the question is, how do you come up with the number of items that you believe a student needs to get correct? So Cal, do you want to take that one? I know we're going to start with backwards design. So if you want to talk about how you've come up with the number of correct attempts, that'd be awesome.
Pretty much every Pink Things topic, every topic on one of these exercises is tied to either an exam question or a laboratory exercise question. And so I get to see how well the students are doing on that particular question. And if they're not doing as well as I want them to, I go back and I increase the number of items they have to get correct to pass that topic. It's that simple. I've done some more sophisticated statistical modeling, but no, you don't need all of that. You make a guess, say you got to get 5 of each one right, and then you're going to figure out that some of them are harder than others by what they're doing on tests and assignments, and you decide to go back and make that 7. That's another great thing about the topics is you can even break one topic up into two and have an easy version and a hard version. Because within Mobius, you can set things up in these single event mastery exercises so that they finish one topic before they get any items out of the next one. And so we've got some where the topics, there's two of each topic, and they finish the easy version before they go on to the tough version. And again, that allows us to write things that are representative instead of focusing on what's fair. Because we've all walked out of a lecture that we gave and run into a situation that I'm really glad my kids aren't running into this right now, because it's overly complicated, or it's not well expressed, or it's somehow not fair. I just spent 50 minutes teaching them something and I didn't get them ready for this crappy version of reality. We can avoid that problem by setting up just right items. Some of them are not going to be fair, but they're still going to be useful to learn. And all of that is tied into topics and proficiency.
All right. So really quickly, I want to show you an example of what we've done. So hopefully, I'm pretty sure everybody in the room here is familiar with correlations. Really quickly, this is just when we're trying to establish a linear relationship between variables so that by knowing one variable, I can predict the other. Now, when we talk about correlations, when I make a decision statistically after analyzing the data, we're all familiar with, I could come up with a negative correlation, a no correlation, or a positive correlation. But more importantly than that, our students need to be placed within a reality of how we actually view that statistical decision in light of the real relationship in the population that we'll never get access to. And what that ends up creating is now we don't have 3 different topics. We actually have 9 different topics that's based on the statistical decision I make and the reality of the population. I could be correct, I could make errors. And so having looked at this example and blown up the idea of the topic of correlation, first of all, you might have thought it's just one topic. It's actually 9 topics in terms of executing the skill of analyzing data that produce a correlational result. Another example that we have is also the different kinds of variables that we have in a study. So at the beginning of the study, we have causes and effects and possible confounds. At the end of the study, we have those plus different kinds of variables that if we've conducted the study well, we've minimized confounding. And so this is a whole bunch of different terms that constitute individual topics that we can turn into single event mastery assignments singly at a time. And then as they get more proficient at it, we can start mixing them together. And to see what this does require, it's a lot of questions that you have to make in question banks and Mobius. And so there is a form, and those of you that actually are from the University of Nebraska, Cal made a sheet, a how-to, and I'm just going to show you on the next slide, that gives you a really nice overview of how to make massive question banks in order to assess topics. This was tailored for Canvas, but first, when Cal first started doing this, it was all to populate Mobius with content repositories. And so when you have time, if you believe that you want to use single event mastery and you're like, I don't know how or where to even start coming up with all these questions, this is a really nice set of examples that you can look at on the PDF to guide you through how to make appropriate question banks for your single event proficiency kinds of assignments. And so that is it in terms of the overview that we wanted to share with you. And so I think now we've got plenty of time to just start talking with one another. So Cal, is there anything you want to say to wrap up?
Can you back up 2 slides? There is one comment I want to make about the correlation one.
Yep.
The really sweet thing about this exercise is that they're learning more than they think they're learning. They're learning, first of all, that they have to look at something and they have to separate what's the pattern of data we found in the sample from what's the pattern of data that we're told is in the population. And they have to separate those two, and they have to learn what language is used to talk about a statistical decision versus a description of something we think we know about a population. And then when they've got which of the 3 decisions it is and which of the 3 population situations, now we know it's one of 9 things. And then they have to know what is this particular vocabulary that we use for describing each of those 9. And this is also something that's really important. They have to learn that kinds of things come in sets, that there's 9 possible situations of the statistical decision and the population. that breaks up into 5 kinds of things that we label: correct rejection, correct retention, type 1, type 2, type 3 errors. Now, if you're trying to get them to get all of those pieces in a lecture, that's a lot to absorb. If you're trying to get them to absorb it in 3 or 4 quiz questions, it's still really tough. But if these kids are going to get 7 of each of these 9 things right, which takes way less time than you would imagine, then they're getting an opportunity to see these things over and over and over again and getting a chance to see, okay, there's 3 of these and 3 of these, so there's 9 of them, and then there's 1 of 5 labels that we attach. And all of that happens because we're giving them reps, and we're giving them reps with feedback, and we're giving them low stakes reps with feedback. That if they miss something, it hardly matters. Bang it again.
That's yeah, I can't help but smile every time I hear both of you speak on these topics, because I think it hits on a bunch of pieces. And I want to make sure that we give a little time for the audience to start queuing up their questions. I know we've seen a few come in. Love to see some more come in, but as we're going through that, I just wanted to ask one area of deeper dive, I guess, for both of you to talk into the idea of motivation, engagement. You've used the term unexpected success for students. Can you quickly talk about, how do you use that, and how does that help leverage in the context of where you're going with education? How does that help students also get the best of them in the positive side, and have them move forward and plow through some of the times where there are some questions that are harder, and to your point, Cal, low stakes, so they can plow through that? I would love for you to talk a little bit about that as we have the audience start queuing up their questions and more inquiry from them.
Cal, can I just start with the student perspective, and then you can hammer it?
Hell yeah.
So my experience with teaching this class, and it's only been for a couple of years, is that for some reason, our students believe that research design and data analysis is the hardest thing on the planet. And in terms of the grades that they get, it is one of the most challenging courses in our major. And so they all come in the room with this trepidation and this certainty that this is unknowable, unlearnable stuff. And they hope for a curve or some sort of grace in order to get through the course. And so by having them go through single event proficiency exercises, the first thing that I do is I contextualize it for them. I actually show them what it is and show them that learning involves making mistakes, and you're actually rewarded for persisting here. And so the cool thing about these exercises is that there is no way to lose unless you quit. And so having said that, Cal, go for it.
Well, one of the things I encourage them to do is to cheat.
That's right.
I tell them, gang up on them, get 2 or 3 people together and do them together. Talk about them. It's cheat, get together. Now, what they eventually figure out is that when they all get together, they can only do one person's exercise. And then they stay together to do the second, and they stay together to do the third. And if things are going well, that means these kids are looking at 2 or 3 times as many as the minimum required number, which means there's the chances of seeing the whole population is really, really good. I talk a lot about how to use this to get more reps. For example, I'll tell people, help somebody else. If somebody's having trouble with something, help them, talk through it. And what we get is these people who are practicing articulating things, so that when we then blend these exercises with other sorts of things we want them to learn, like fill in the blanks, definitions, and essays, the exercises are already starting to build some conversational and descriptive language. And that's why I encourage them, cheat, gang up on this, get 2 or 3 people together, Zoom them together, and then each of you do 3 times as many. Surprising how well that works.
So I guess that tie into the question from our audience, William Stone. Thank you so much for that. You talked about, you call these questions low stakes. This is coming from our audience, but are they required to stick with the topic until they get it? Can you follow up with that?
You don't get credit for the exercise based on how many you got right. The exercise is over when you've gotten 100% of the required number right in each topic. Then you're done and you have full credit. The other thing is, I don't know, perhaps we've communicated this poorly. These things are not bone-crushing questions. These are things that are right on the edge of common sense. These are the things that people who do this stuff for a living do routinely without much thought. We are really trying to build what I like to call the common sense of the discipline. This is the primary vocabulary. This is the primary set of decision-making activities or exercises. These are not bone-crushing, going to go crazy. And one of the ways that you can tell is that if you look, they're not taking 15 items to get to 5. They're taking 6 and 7 to get to 5. They may go on and off the first couple, but then there seems to be this moment of epiphany, and they don't miss another one. And so we feel okay making them stick with it, again, because of the overall level of difficulty and also the importance of this stuff. If they are having trouble with a particular thing, wallow in it till you get it. Because it's as important to understand that thing you're struggling with as the 7 other ones that you've already finished. And every once in a while, you'll see that. You'll see somebody where like their last 12 questions were all the same topic because they just didn't get that. And then they did, and they don't miss any more.
I think it's also important to mention that this class does not have a textbook because it's so applied and it's based on what work Cal's done in private industry. We don't find a textbook that can get students to execute the skill the way that we want them to. And so they will say, boy, it seems like it's going to take a lot of time, but they're also not spending hours pretending to read a textbook that we know the majority of them are not actually reading. They're actually doing stuff in order to learn. It's not passive.
Absolutely.
So a few questions have come in from there. I'm sure it's sparking more and more, so please keep them coming. I think one that comes up that's really tied to what we just talked about here, which I'm sure it's on everyone's mind, is to cover off content of a course when we need a high volume of exercises. So any guidance as strategically building those exercises. And I know that document that you created, we're happy if that's something that we can create a subset of that and offer that to the audience, we can do that as well. But even just a high level part of how do you approach the development of many questions, even though we all know you're not writing each one from scratch every single time. That's the power that Mobius has, but he can offer a little bit of guidance there for Dietmar Kennepel. Actually, I've emailed him before from Athabasca. Hello, welcome. So yeah, if you can answer that question, that'd be wonderful.
If you're just starting, have one multiple choice. If the exercise is multiple choice based, have one multiple choice question. It has 4 or 5 distractors. You don't actually have just one multiple choice question. You have about 7. So I guess, let me just see if it's okay. I think we have, yeah. Is it okay if I share my screen again really quickly? I'll just show you a really quick example. I didn't spend a whole lot of time covering it because I wanted to make sure I got done. And so from this particular example, people have to identify causal variables, effect variables, and 2 different types of confounds. And so one thing that Cal does really well is he presents questions in the form of a real story. This is an actual, it looks like it's an actual study that was conducted. And so the longer the paragraph they have to read, the more items you can pull out of it. And so there are a number of different variables. And so for each question that I put in here, I can put the name of a variable and I'm going to have the same 4 distractors. Or conversely, I could ask, what's the intended causal variable, and have 4 different variable distractors that appear in this paragraph. So that by the time I'm done chewing on this one paragraph about a particular study, I could have created or populated 12 different multiple choice questions. And so the idea is that you use the question, you then turn a question into a second question with one of the distractors in it, and have yourselves kind of blow up your question banks, starting with just simply one question. Cal?
So let me answer a couple questions, including I'm going to try to get to Justin's. But that's a great explanation for how you get a workable number of items without driving yourself crazy. I'm going to interpret that question as, where the hell do you start? And you start by looking, I think, at your exams and your assignments. What is some question on the exam that the little buggers are missing? You're sure that you're teaching it well, but they're just not getting it. Or there's some part of an assignment that they're just not getting. Write an exercise for it. Point an exercise at that. We did a meta-analysis. God, it must be 30 years ago now. We did a meta-analysis looking at how well people in statistics classes did on their final on deciding whether to retain or reject the null. I mean, come on. You look at the p-value. If it's less than 0.05, you reject the null. If it's more than 0.05, you retain the null. We had data from something like 350 stats classes taught in different disciplines. And the base rate on that was right around 70%. That's absurd. It's a binary choice. You flip a coin, you get it 50% of the time. And what we discovered as we got into it is that people, in some of those classes, people were only getting 10 or 15 tries at doing it before they had the exam. So they weren't practicing it. It was explained to them very nicely, but they weren't practicing it, and they weren't getting it. Before our kids take that second exam that's about basic bivariate statistics, they have made the null hypothesis decision in the class and in the lab more than 100 times. And guess what? Not many miss it. And so where do you start? You use this one of the most powerful tools in your teaching repertoire. You use it on the stuff that you need help teaching. You probably are teaching things extraordinarily well, but teaching and practice are better than just teaching. So where do you start? That's where you start. Justin, how do you figure out what the topics are? You look at the different versions of that question that you've asked. Or you look at the versions of the questions that you don't dare ask because they're unfair, or they're too hard, or they're just plain mean, and make sure you got a topic that's more of that kind of question. We're not getting kids ready to go out and take a test that was written to be fair. We are sending kids out to take on a world that is sloppy. And they have to get past that sloppiness and do their job anyway. Now, Manda and I are particularly sensitive to this because we treat research methods and data analysis as the core of everything else. Psychology has given itself over to being empirical, and so they have to be able to do this. And so the idea that it's too hard or unfair cannot be tolerated. And so you teach it the best you can, and then single event proficiency until they can get it right. That was probably more philosophy than you intended.
Well, I think it.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to move on to a question from David Wepler from the webinar, but if you wanted to add to that, please.
No, it was another question that I saw, and it was literally about Mobius in terms, I don't know if anybody is interested in seeing how the single event proficiency looks in terms of the interface and how you figure out.
I think it's very related to what David's asking. So as you move to what you're going to show, I can definitely tap that into it. So the question that he had asked is around feedback, but also using it to foster classroom collaboration, cheating, all the different pieces that you had talked about, Cal. So the specific question was, what assignment settings do you use in Mobius for the students to get this significant number of reps with these questions? And there's just some elements about how do we actually use that. And David, we can go a little bit further with more details to respond offline, but I wanted to see, Manda, what you could cover in terms of how you set things up, and then we can go into the next questions.
Sure. So this is just building on trying to build their knowledge base about the decisions they make when they look at data. They look at the output of data from a correlational analysis. And so I just answered a question really quickly, but there were 3 parts to this question, but pay attention to, again, it's organized by topic. And in this particular case, there are 2, and to show mastery, they need to get 8 questions right from each of those 2 topics or 2 question groups. And so as they continue through, it's not enough to just ask them about a correlation. They have to be able to interpret the direction of the relationship, compare it to the p-value, decide if it's support or no support. And so you can see that we've broken down the script that students need to employ in order to look at data output and make a decision on it. And so this also breaks down in metacognitive steps how you execute a particular skill. Cal, what do you want me to do here?
So there's a whole kind of question called mastery in Mobius. And once you have your questions in topics, you go into the content repository, you tell it you want to make a new thing, it asks you what kind, and you say mastery. And then you...
That, or are we good? I don't know how granular this needs to be. Christina, are you going to handle this some other time?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
going to do a more detailed bit for later, but I think the one part was more of maybe this is something that you can tap into. So you could stop sharing on this part, but there's a point here of, students hesitate to submit an assignment even though all the awesome feedback is available as they do that. Have you ever found that hesitancy from a student that because they have this ability to do multiple reps, they're hesitating to actually press it because maybe they can do better later with another rep? How do you deal with that hesitancy? And maybe from your perspective, it can add some color to that response.
So the magic of single event proficiency is that none of that exists. They don't submit an exercise. They keep doing items until they get to the point that they have 100% of the required number in each topic and the exercise ends. The little next button doesn't show up and they're done.
Additionally, I know there are some students that just are hamstrung with the idea of making a decision and getting it incorrect, even if you tell them it's low stakes. So one of the things I always do on the first day of class that we actually assign one of these exercises is I open it myself and I go through the process.
Absolutely.
And I act as extreme as I possibly can because I am very neurotic. It's not really hard for me to tap into that fear because I'm afraid. But then I realize, and I'll curse, shit, missed it. And then, tell them what I'm feeling in that moment and like, oh, wait, there's another question here. It doesn't keep track of the ones I got wrong. It just tells me how many more I need to get right. This is pretty cool. I can actually learn from my mistakes and not feel like I'm being penalized. And that is a mindset that you have to break students out of, especially the really, really good ones. Those of you in engineering, I'm sorry, but a lot of these poor students are terrified to make a mistake and we have to celebrate it. It's like, no, this is great. You can ask what you did wrong here and make it okay.
The Mobius system allows them to go back into any exercise that they've completed and look at each item. And so I suggest that the ones who, some of them concentrate on their failures and they want to never have that failure again. Easy peasy. Jump on there, go to the exercise, scroll down. It tells you which ones you missed. Look at those again and see if you would ever miss that item again. And so people can concentrate on the ones they got right. They can concentrate on the ones they got wrong, or they can just do the exercise a second time. The way the scoring is automatically kept in Mobius is at the instructor's discretion. Mine is always set for best, which means that somebody can go in there the first time, struggle and toil, get it all right, and they've got 100% on that exercise. If they want to later, they can get back on it. And if they answer the first three, and I remember all of this stuff, I don't want to go through it all again, just get out of it and never go back. Because I have it set to best, and the one that they did all of is the one that shows up in the grade book. So this allows them to be able to go back in and see if they remember stuff and redo as many as they think they need to. If you go back and look, you'll often see that somebody went in and they only did one topic. If a question came up in another topic, they recognized which ones they wanted to do, and they just didn't do it. Okay, here's one of the ones I want, and they try that. This gives them all sorts of flexibility to learn the way they like to take their fears and their hopes into account as they're using the system.
Christina.
Yes.
I saw another question about how do we feel about guided or step-by-step questions?
You went right for what I was going
Right
for.
there.
Please dive right
I'm
in.
excited
Get
about
in
that
there.
question. Right. So let me just contextualize this with our specific example. So in this psych class, they are asked in Unit 1, 14 different essay questions. We give them up front, and we say, you can decide if you want to get 100 on these by answering all these questions now. And one of the things we have to do with psychology students is to convince them that this is a skill class. I'm not asking you how you feel. And so when we ask our students essay questions, we're asking them to execute a skill, but do it verbally. And so I don't need to know how they feel, and I don't even want them to invent their own essay. I want them to memorize the script, which is the language of our discipline, like PEMDAS. Why reinvent PEMDAS if I just gave you PEMDAS? And so that's actually one of the things that Cal has done to get our students ready for the essays. He gives them in Mobius an essay prep. And I want to show you how this works so that they learn the script and they don't have to embellish. It's just learn this language and learn how to actually use it as a behavior. So speak it and do it. So really quickly, I'm just going to show this really quickly. We give them terms, but then we also give them essay questions. At the end of every lesson, there could potentially be essay questions. So here's number 4 and number 5. What are the kinds of validity we want our research to have, and la, la, la. So after every particular lesson, there's going to be more and more and more. So that by the end of Unit 1, there are potentially 14 different essays. They're going to see 2 on their test. And so they're like, holy crap, how do I do that? Well, Mobius. And whoops, I'm in Unit 3. Exam 1, essay practice. Remember, we're trying to teach them a particular skill. And so what Cal has done is he gives them the essay question. Oh, good. Briefly describe the kinds of validity. That's amazing. These are not presented in order, but that was pretty serendipitous. Describe the kinds of validity we want, la, la, la. And so if you look here, the students are asked to select an answer from 2 options. One is the correct beginning of the essay. The other is the incorrect beginning of the essay. And so according to the way that this skill is executed, in this particular example, there are 5 parts to it. He's got 2 sentences for each part, and it's their job to pick the correct statement so that by the end of it, if they've selected 5 items correctly, they have a finished essay. And the beauty of Mobius is that after you click grade question, it will tell you if you get it right or not, and the students can actually copy the right answer in. So I'm just going to do all of these. Click grade question, and it's going to tell me what I got right and what I didn't get right. So this is what they said, and it's actually the correct answer. So they can copy and paste all of this into a Word document. And the really cool thing about this is I actually use this as a source of information for them. I keep track of who does the essay prep. And at the end of the Unit 1 exam, I show the grade distributions for the students who did the essay prep and the grade distributions for the students who did not do the essay prep. I then make some egregious causal statements and see if they can tell me I'm full of shit. And it works out really well. It's just multiple ways to use Mobius to help inform our students about how to learn skills effectively. So I hope
now remember, these aren't your typical essays. If we were to be completely honest, we would call them something like stuff we absolutely want to have in their heads. And so we are using every hook that we know to try and maximize the amount of these 14 things that they have in their head. And one of the best ways to make sure that people have things is to give them away free. And that's basically what happens here. These questions are going to be on the exam. These are the parts of the answer. Here it all is. This can be a guaranteed 100% on this unit if you do the work. Because one of the things that we are trying to drive home the whole way through this class and lab is how many sentences need to end with comma if you do the work. And this is part of that high-level philosophical thing. It's also a way of them going, oh, geez, all I have to do is. We want students saying that to themselves over and over and over again. All I have to do is the pink things, and I'll have the vocabulary. All I have to do is the exam prep, and I'm going to do well on the exam. There's then a lot of work to do, but by focusing it, narrowing it, give it a name, put it in an order, promise them that this is going to matter, we get them to work a lot harder in our classes. We typically get 2 to 3 times the hours per week as people spend on other classes. It's been studied by the university several times, and we are always the dramatic outlier in terms of how much time we get from our kids.
I guess that's a really good tie-in to a question that I thought would show up, and it did, around, the use of ChatGPT. How do you even think about it based on the approach that you've taken? And is it something that you take into consideration, or are you just not even worried about it because of the structure that you've made? I'd love your take on that overall, because I'm sure other people are thinking about it.
Cal, do you want to talk about your friend Chat?
The biggest problem with ChatGPT, and I use ChatGPT a lot. I don't use it for writing as much as other people. And for this reason, ChatGPT has to start somewhere. And where it starts is based on what it kind of happened to run into when it gave you some minuscule amount of information and memory before it starts writing an answer. ChatGPT does not do a complete data search. It does one based on, I don't know what it is. I've heard estimates as low as 0.4 of a second is all that you get, even on the paid version, if you're really in the middle of something. So it goes out and it grabs some stuff. We aren't asking them questions that don't have the answer in front of them. It takes longer to get on ChatGPT and decide which of those 2 statements about internal validity is correct than to just look at it, pick one, and get the feedback.
Yep.
The system is more efficient than anything else they can do, and that sucks them into the system. Now, in laboratory, where they're doing some more writing and some more things like that, then we worry about where they get those writing sources from. And, we're running, what are we running? Canvas. And in Canvas, we use Turnitin. And so you get that feedback if this kid's can't cranking out something that 14 other people gave you exactly the same thing.
It's not even that now, though. The nice thing is the lab instructors also use Chat. So they will chat the exercises too. And you can hone in on usually 2 or 3 bizarre terms that Chat will use. That's just like Old English or just something funky. And they've done a really good job of capturing those students. And honestly, the cool thing, but also the sad thing, is that the students that I've met with, and there've only been 2 this semester, that have used Chat more than once, despite us asking them not to, in lab. This is not from Mobius, but when asking them about a research summary that they did, it is not that they want to be lazy or that they don't care. They don't have confidence. And so rather than lighting their rear ends on fire, it is a moment for me to look them straight in the eye and tell them, you have got what it takes to do this. I absolutely believe in you. Stop cheating yourself. Stop relying on a computer when you have your brain to make mistakes and learn from. And I think it's really important that we recognize that they're kids still in a lot of ways. They want to learn if they could take the path of least resistance first. Let them make that mistake. Judge them for it, but don't light them up the first time through or even the second time through. If they know they're getting caught and you still have grace, I think it'll go a long way. Now, if this little turkey turns in one more lab that's chatted up, I will come back to the meeting and eat every one of my words. But I just think it's really important that post-COVID, we try not to assume laziness or we assume that they don't like the content. I think that our students need to learn how to learn all over again in a lot of cases.
Hey, Christina, can I answer anonymous attendee 10:31 a.m.?
Yes, absolutely. Go for it. And then we'll take one right after that. And then we'll end it off. Yes, for sure.
How do you balance the use of technology with traditional teaching methods to ensure you effectively support student learning? One of the things we haven't mentioned is that the Mobius exercises for the first exam, that about half of those are prelude exercises or prelude exercises, which means they do them before they come into the lecture. And so the lecture, where one of the big topics is, what are the 3 kinds of research hypotheses? Attributive, associative, and causal. Before they walk in the door, they've done the exercise for that to mastery, to proficiency, so they know what those three things are. We don't spend the 15 minutes going over what they are. We blow through it, and then we start talking about using them, what the differences are, why we care. So that's one of the ways that we blend it. And if you look at that really careful, you'll see there's just all kinds of elements of stuff that we've been taught to do. There's backwards teaching, there's just-in-time teaching. There's all of those elements are in there because they're actually doing something to completion before they walk in the door. I don't have to have them fill out a questionnaire or take a quiz. I know that they got them done. And they might not nail them 100%, but they are not starting with cold. The other half of the exercises are things that follow up on what we did today, that focus on the stuff we did today that we're going to use tomorrow. And we give them a chance to catch those up. Now, I have several semesters required that the exercises be done before the next meeting. I don't get a grade distribution difference between having that rule, a gentler rule, or no rule at all, in part because students figure out how they want to use the exercises. And students come in two kinds. The ones that are right about how to use those exercises to their advantage, and the ones who are either wrong or just procrastinating, and they have to do all the things at the end. They don't get them all done. And many of them figure out that the parts of the exam that they did well on were the parts that they had done the exercises. And the next time they do all of them. So there's all kinds of systems for self-learning built into this, and all sorts of systems that save kids from themselves and teach them very often. This is where kids learn how to study. They have all kinds of ideas about how they study best and how they learn best, and 2/3 of them are fictitious and wrong. But in here, because of all the different ways that they could study, they actually get to figure out what works well for them.
So I guess for our last question, I guess it pairs up nicely with the one that you just answered in terms of traditional methods and technology. What about time? This is kind of the part of where your expertise and your experience and just with the learned experience that you have in educating students. How does time teaching, how does time impact the teaching and learning? So learning one topic in week 1, applying it in week 2. What are your overall thoughts, just to wrap it up from that perspective? Aside from the tools and technology that you use, how do you apply your understanding of how students learn and how quickly they forget to get them down the path to make sure that that isn't the core reason why they're not doing well in a class, that we learned it too early in the season, for example?
Let me say one thing quickly. The prelude exercise, using things as prelude exercises, gives us the opportunity to introduce a topic and apply it during the same lecture. We save 20 minutes covering stuff that they're covering in the prelude exercise. I don't need that 20 minutes anymore. I've still got all of my 50 minutes. I spend 5 of it instead of 20 reviewing that stuff. That gives me 15 found minutes. And so that's why we typically introduce, expand, and apply a topic all in one sitting. And that kind of integration really matters. I'll shut up.
Super.
You're mute.
Yeah, I know. The way that the class is set up, you may want to consider if you allow your students to take exams more than once, especially if the class has a set of skills that build on prior executed skills. They take their first test and they get 2 attempts at it. And then they actually get another shot at their first test in week 11, after we've covered 2 additional units that require that they understand everything that we did in unit 1. And so that also builds resiliency in them, because if they're slower learners and it takes them a little bit longer to acquire this information, or they're slow to actually buy into the pink things, and it does click, then eventually we think that we should give them another opportunity to show what they've learned. And so you might want to think about staggering out your attempts on exams to be able to show when mastery has taken place, even in the slower to warm up students.
That's a really good way of wrapping it up too. Again, we could go on for a very long time, and as our history has indicated, every time we've worked with Manda and Cal with this, our meetings always go long. So I figured that this way was a way for us to tie us up a bit. So really appreciate all of your time, everyone in the audience attending. Absolutely, Dr. Williamson, Dr. Garbin, your insights have been helpful to us, and I hope they were to everyone else. I know we had a couple more questions to get to. We will make sure everyone has access to them. I wanted to make sure we get under the time. Johnny, please help us wrap up and make sure that
No,
everyone knows what they need to do.
I think you covered it, Christina. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Calamanda, for everything. Lots of great comments in the chat. Just thanking you for your time today. So feel free to check that out. For everyone else, like Christina mentioned, if we didn't get to your questions, we'll be sure to respond to you through email. For everyone who is here live or watching the recording, we thank you for taking the time to pay attention, and we'll send around some resources later on to everyone who registered for this webinar. If you have any direct questions, though, there's our email right there, marketing@digitaled.com. We're happy to respond to you there. But again, thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a great time, great conversation, and we hope you all have a great week ahead of you. Take care, everybody.